All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the September edition of the Electrification Coalition's Charging Infrastructure webinar series. My name is Chris Bass, and I'm the Director of EV Infrastructure Investments for the EC. And I'm excited to be joined today by some great friends of the EC, Michael Samulon from the city of Los Angeles and Julia Murphy from San Antonio. Today's webinar will dig into some of the best practices that local governments of all shapes and sizes can take to maximize federal investment for the bipartisan infrastructure law and leverage those investments in other federal initiatives to accelerate transportation electrification. So first, I'm going to provide a sneak peek at the recommendations from an upcoming report from the EC that we're calling the Local Government Playbook. And the Local Government Playbook will provide a series of recommendations for local governments on how they can best prepare their communities for this EV moment by looking at what they can do today, tomorrow, and over the next 6 months. And then we'll hear from our Los Angeles and San Antonio friends about the work they've done to put some of these ideas and initiatives into action over the past several years and how that work is going to propel them into the future. We'll then have some Q&A at the end where we hope to get to some of your questions. And so as always, please put your questions in the box on the screen and we'll see if we can get to as many as possible. So let's dig in. As I mentioned, the EC will soon be launching our Local Government Playbook, an action plan for local governments to prepare, engage, and activate their communities to leverage federal investments in electric vehicles. As a brief refresher, you may recall that $5 billion in formula funding for EV charging from the bipartisan infrastructure law is being deployed by states through the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, or NEVI. State DOTs are the lead agencies in preparing for and distributing the funding from the NEVI program, but local governments are still going to play a vital role in ensuring the effective, efficient, and equitable distribution of that funding. So just a few examples of why it's so important for local governments to engage. First and foremost, local governments are a stakeholder, just like anybody else. And ultimately, charging stations are going to be deployed on the ground within the boundaries of local communities, counties, cities, and towns. And so what happens there matters to those local communities. And in some states, local governments can even put in applications for funding depending on the disbursement models that are being adopted by state DOTs. Second, of course, charging station installations are going to be governed by local permitting and zoning rules. Those rules can go a long way to either easing the installation process or making it more time-consuming, difficult, and costly for developers. So local governments have a big say when it comes to how quickly charging stations can be deployed based on the rules in their community. Also, the $5 billion in formula funding is just part of the $7.5 billion in total that the bipartisan infrastructure law set aside for EV charging. The other $2.5 billion is going to be distributed through a competitive grant process that we're still waiting on some additional guidance from. And local governments and community groups are going to be eligible to apply. So it makes sense to prepare now and be ready for when that grant process opens up. Lastly, but most importantly, perhaps, this is the EV moment. Not only the bipartisan infrastructure law, but the Inflation Reduction Act and other federal investments, other federal initiatives are opening up opportunities to go farther, faster on transportation electrification. And for local governments interested in transitioning their communities to electric mobility, leveraging federal investment is a great way to move additional policies and projects forward. So importantly, that time for action is now. We've heard from some local governments that they aren't sure there's anything for them to do right now to participate in NEVI. And we want to say loud and clear, not so fast. Local governments will be vital to the successful implementation of the NEVI program. They're at the forefront of regional collaboration. Local governments, we're interested in their residents being able to travel outside of their political boundaries in their EV. So it makes sense that local governments lead on a lot of these issues. So they should start now with early plays to prepare for federal and state investment, because effective, efficient, and equitable charging station deployment will require early action and a long-term comprehensive plan. And so that's why we're going to be releasing the Local Government Playbook in a few weeks to guide those actions and help communities run those plays. So the Local Government Playbook is going to be organized around 4 key areas: public policy, state and regional planning, stakeholder and community engagement, and site planning. And so within those areas, we've identified the top actions for local governments to take today, tomorrow, and over the next 6 months to leverage federal funding to meet their EV goals. So I'm going to say a brief word about each of the topic areas as I put the key plays up on the screen here, but don't worry, we'll have this checklist up on our website soon if it's not already, and we'll be rolling out the full report soon. So first on policy, municipal governments must play, municipalities must pay close attention to their policy environment to ensure that local laws and procedures help advance deployment. Rigorous policy agendas that support current deployment efforts and lay the groundwork for growth will ensure communities are prepared to maximize on this historic investment. Regional collaboration. I already mentioned how important regional collaboration is in order to ensure that drivers can go farther faster, and strong regional planning that accounts for key factors like station location, user experience, and reduced installation costs will play key roles in ensuring the interoperability of the public charging network. Stakeholder engagement. Effective stakeholder engagement is vital to the success of EV charging projects. Engaged stakeholders can not only champion advocacy efforts and help fill funding gaps with additional support, but a diverse array of stakeholders who are engaged in and excited about NEVI-funded projects move the needle by building momentum, adding capacity to city resources, and ensuring that deployment is community-centric. Charging infrastructure that's built around a community's specific mobility needs will aid at-scale deployment and begin to champion related equity concerns. This community engagement can also ensure that the Justice 40 commitments, a White House initiative ensuring that at least 40% of a federal program's benefits are stewarded towards disadvantaged communities, are followed impactfully and effectively. And lastly, site planning is going to be critical for effective implementation. Charging station projects often require extensive timelines. Project plans for permitting may require additional external support. And these additional requirements increase both the time and the money needed to deploy projects. And so careful and extensive site planning could help lower the barrier to entry by ensuring projects are not held up by ambiguous external processes. So with that, a little teaser for our upcoming report, and I hope that you will all peruse that as it is deployed. And I will close my portion and introduce my colleague, Sarah Reed, who is going to take us the rest of the way. Sarah is one of the EC's leading experts in our local electrification efforts. She is the director of programs at the EC, and as such is responsible for managing many of our programs and leads, among other things, the Climate Mayor's Electric Vehicle Purchasing Collaborative. The collaborative assists public fleets in their transition to EVs, which is a great stepping stone for broader community electrification efforts. Sarah was also in 2020 named one of the 30 under 30 sustainability professionals by Green Biz, and was previously a program coordinator for the National Association of Regional Councils, and so is definitely plugged in to local government efforts for transportation electrification. So Sarah, I will send it over to you.
Thank you so much, Chris, and thanks for that introduction. It is a pleasure to be here with all of you today, and a pleasure to welcome our guests, Michael and Julia, to share some of the really excellent work that they're doing in their cities. And just another reminder before we get started, please place your questions for Michael and Julia in the Q&A box below. We will have an opportunity to answer them later in the webinar. So first, I'd like to welcome Michael Samulon, a longtime partner of the EC and partner on the Climate Mayor's EV Purchasing Collaborative over the last several years. He is the Director of Vehicle Electrification and City Projects in the Sustainability Office of Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti. And Michael has overseen the deployment of over 1,500 EVs in their city fleet, charging infrastructure for employees and the public. And he focuses on policy efforts around building codes, curb usage, and is working on long-term infrastructure and operations planning in anticipation of a fully electrified bus fleet and goods movement sector. Michael, I will go ahead and pass it to you to take it away.
Thanks, Sarah. Appreciate that introduction, and good morning and good afternoon to everyone. Very excited to be here today. So yes, Director of Vehicle Electrification, that means I get to do a lot of fun stuff, and I'm going to very quickly go over sort of the why are we doing this. I'm not going to spend a lot of time. I anticipate that most of the people on the webinar today are pretty familiar with the whys, and then we'll be discussing quickly the three-pronged approach that we've been taking here in Los Angeles to accelerate transportation decarbonization. So first things first, we of course started with putting together a Paris-compliant climate plan in 2019, which was a follow-up to our 2015 sustainability plan. And what you can see here are emissions by sector in Los Angeles. Transportation is the second.
I think we lost Michael briefly, so why don't we go ahead and pass it to you, Julia. I'll do your introduction, and then hopefully Michael will get back on and we will circle back to him since he had just started. So Julia is the City of San Antonio Deputy Chief Sustainability Officer and is on the team working on the city's first climate action and adaptation plan, focusing on energy efficiency, modern transportation, green infrastructure, and air quality. We are so excited to have you, Julia, and I will pass it over to you.
Thank you so much. And nice pivot. And I do see that Michael is reconnecting, so he will be back. But I will go ahead and go through my slides. And yes, hello, I'm Julia Murphy. I'm the Deputy Chief Sustainability Officer for the City of San Antonio. And let's just get right into it. So San Antonio is an emerging city around electric vehicles. We want to make sure that we're going to be a player in the game. And if you can see the numbers on the left-hand side of the screen, back a few years ago, we had 2,400 registered EVs in our city, in our region, but we were projecting about 45,000 EVs by 2030. That's a major milestone within our climate planning effort, as most cities have probably done. But fast forward a couple of years, we've emerged from the pandemic or almost there, and we have 7,100 EVs in San Antonio. And now our utility is predicting around 80,000 EVs in 2030, which is just right around the corner. So you can see, I don't have to tell anyone on this call, the market is taking over, it's coming, we're there already. And so how are we going to be prepared, and how did we prepare? Also, the city of San Antonio, just to shine a light on some of the fun stuff that's going on in our city, DeLorean has located in our city, and yes, they will be building cars, cool Back to the Future cars, and yes, they will come in red. We haven't seen one off the production line yet, but we're anxiously awaiting those to hopefully be seeing a few of those driving around our streets. They are quite expensive, I've heard, maybe not for everyone, but maybe some can get on the waiting list. So as again, most cities have done, we have passed a climate action adaptation plan that was done at the end of 2019 before we went into the world pandemic. But the goal was to reach carbon neutrality by 2050. In 2016, which is the baseline greenhouse gas inventory for our climate action plan, we had GHG emissions from the transportation sector at about roughly 38%. Again, not unlike most major metropolitan areas in the country. Subsequent to that, we also passed an ozone attainment master plan. And this was adopted in June 2019, just after the EPA declared that the city of San Antonio and the Bexar County region where we sit was in non-attainment, marginal non-attainment for ground level ozone. The city staff took this very seriously because it has immediate impacts on the economy. But I'm sorry to report that as of last spring, we had not gotten ourselves out of marginal non-attainment, and in fact learned that we would be bumped up to moderate non-attainment. It's a growing region. We've got lots more people, lots more cars, lots more industry coming in. And so it's going to be a tough thing to accomplish. Nevertheless, the reason I'm bringing this up is because electric vehicles and vehicle electrification are two major control strategies that are in both major pieces of policy. And this is the number one thing that was mentioned in the local government playbook that the Electrification Coalition is going to be publishing soon. So it's important to have that baseline there and to put these things in there so that you can build from the policy and actually, show that you are implementing. On the right-hand side, just a quick snapshot on our greenhouse gas inventory that we just completed. We're always a little bit in arrears as we're getting the data, but transportation actually moved up a couple of percentage points. Not unexpectedly. Again, we're kind of in the same range as most big cities, but we're going in the wrong direction. So hopefully vehicle electrification will help mitigate these numbers. So we also felt it important to lead by example. We have had a green fleet policy on the books for over a decade in San Antonio. But what that really meant was that we were buying hybrid vehicles, Priuses, in particular for our administrative fleet. In the last 2 years, we've really accelerated that effort to brush off that policy, renew it, align it more with the external facing policy, our climate plan and our ozone attainment master plan, and then really put it into practice. So now we have 19 EVs that are in our fleet. We installed the charging infrastructure to go with it. In the next fiscal year, or coming in immediately, we're having a couple of dozen more EVs, and we're projecting to have 100 electric vehicles by 2025. We've got a long way to go here, but we're kind of taking a conservative approach. We're doing the cars where we can, but we're waiting on the bigger fleet vehicles that are part of our inventory as to see when prices come down and when the technology improves, because we want to assure everyone that business will go on as usual and the city will be able to run its operations. So the second thing in the local government playbook is state and regional planning. And, I come from a municipality. We talk about what we can do within our own city limits, but as was mentioned, people drive everywhere. And so we need to be aware of what is going on in our, in our region and on our interstate highways. I took this image just yesterday from the TxDOT state planning effort around vehicle electrification, specifically on alternative fuel corridors. And they have a really cool interactive website that anyone can access and go on and really zoom in, zoom out, look at the big planning effort that's going on to prepare for EV charging. And I just took a little look. This is San Antonio, kind of that yellow area. The information is coming from the DOE and NREL, and it's placed on this map. You can zoom in, and I zoomed in on one of the kind of reddish orange dots because those are DC fast charging stations, and I wanted to see what the data was around that planned EVSE. It is actually being funded through VW settlement money that you can find out on the website. You can see what the grant amount was for that project, $418,000 and $418,000 and change $1,000, sorry. And there will be 4 of them at that location. So that's cool. And all the other green dots are all the stuff that's either on the ground or coming. One more thing on this, we have 2 alternative fuel corridors that are established running through our city. That's IH10 and IH35. But you can see those are green. The kind of the dotted orange lines are proposed or not quite finalized alternative fuel corridors. So the state of Texas is looking at that as well. Good to know because we're going to need it everywhere. And then the third, one of the third things is the stakeholder and community engagement. And this is an effort that we have actually been working on for quite some time to make sure that we, again, are communicating externally that we are an EV-friendly city. And so we have done quite a bit of work around branding a campaign. We call it EVSA. And we've produced some assets in both English and Spanish. We put them up on a website. And we've given people an opportunity to go do the research themselves, but also ask questions and get support if they need a little bit of hand holding while they're making their next decision on the possible vehicle that they will be purchasing. We'll actually accessed funding for this initiative through congestion mitigation air quality money, which came about as a result of us going into non-attainment for federal ozone standards. So, good and bad. We got some, money that we didn't have access to before because of our air quality status. But I think all of us would agree that we didn't want to get into that status to begin with. So here we are. We'll try to mitigate from going forward. And then the other category in the local government playbook is site planning. This we also have been doing for quite some time. We did a comprehensive market analysis and cost benefit analysis of the state of EVs and vehicle electrification in our city a couple of years ago. Actually, it was happening at the same time that we were putting our climate plan together, so that we could have the baseline data necessary to then go back to policymakers and say, here's the state of what's going on, and here is where we need to be. And so we identified some locations, and I'm sorry, my slides are a little bit behind, so I'm going to pull them up over here. Okay, we identified 25 sites that we wanted to put publicly accessible charging infrastructure on city-owned property, because that is the property that we have control of. So we knew that we could get that accomplished. And we went into a public-private partnership with Blink Charging about 1.5 years ago. We are in the process of implementing those charging stations right now. We had a ribbon cutting on the first one about 1 year ago, and that was at the San Antonio Zoo. So anytime, just a plug for community engagement, when you do a project, if you can get little kids and animals to your event, you will have great success and good photo ops as well. So this happened while we were working on this project. Our city accessibility office actually got a complaint about some of our EV charging infrastructure that was already in place long before we started this project as not being fully accessible. And so they started delving into it. And while they were delving into it, the U.S. Access Board came out with new federal guidelines. So the timing was really interesting. We had actually paused our project. We were accelerated and going really fast. We had to put it on pause as we were figuring out this accessibility information. And then we got, lo and behold, a lot of the gray area, quote unquote, cleared up. So in Texas, it was simply guidelines. It was not really spelled out that you had to do this explicitly. We were trying to comply where it was possible, but it wasn't going to be always possible at every single site. So long story short, we had to go back, and now we're going back, and every single site that's on city-owned property will be fully accessible. Also, the state of Texas had recommended that at least 20% of the stations at each site should be accessible, or no less than one. Many of the sites that we're putting a station has dual port charging stations, so that meant that that site had to be fully accessible. Long story short, I'm bringing this up because it was an issue that we knew about. We put it in our RFP as something that we would try to accomplish, but it wasn't guaranteed. And now it's actually a requirement. So it behooves, especially municipal governments that are trying to do quick deployment, that it's not going to be quick, and to make sure that now that we have these federal guidelines, again, I think it's going to clear up a lot of confusion for a lot of people that are doing these projects. Because we were asking all over the place, who has done this and who had to work on this before us, because we'd like to know, and there wasn't a lot of precedence for a municipality. So those are the 4 categories of where we've worked so far. We know that we have some gaps to fill and some puzzle pieces to figure out. We do want to be prepared for the federal funding that's coming down the pipeline. And actually, as we've revised this program that I'm talking about right now, publicly accessible charging on city infrastructure, the pause has allowed us to do some contract negotiations to allow us to take advantage of future funding opportunities that we hadn't foreseen when we did this original contract negotiation. So with that, I will stop. Thank you for having me today. And I'm sure there will be some questions, so I'll be around later to answer those. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Julia. We've always appreciated your partnership and leadership on this topic. Especially appreciate your tidbits today about animals plus children for press conferences related to EV charging, and also the Access Board guidelines for the ADA compliance for charging. I know that's something that we have talked about quite a few times, and like you said, precedent was really hard to find in examples. So we've been excited to share those out with cities as well. And we're happy to share those guidelines if any of you have not seen those. So thank you again, Julia. And we do have Michael back. So we are excited, Michael, to go ahead and throw it back to you to talk a lot more about what the city of LA is up to.
Thanks, Sarah. Hopefully things go as planned this time. Not sure what happened before. My apologies if it was from my end, and my apologies on behalf of the EC if it was from their end. And Julia noted on the zoo, we have some zoo chargers, and I don't think we ever brought animals out to those installations. And clearly, although they are popular, we could probably have them be even more popular. So, all right, is my slide up? Not sure if it's up yet or not. Oh, okay. So what I'm seeing here is, there we go. All right. So I don't know what y'all heard before. I'm going to quickly skip through these first couple of slides, but similar to what we were hearing from Julia, you know, the why behind all of this, and then the sort of three-pronged approach that we've been taking here in Los Angeles to overall transportation decarbonization. So in 2019, we released our Green New Deal. It was a 4-year update to our sustainability plan that had come out in 2015, which had our original electrification goals. And at the time, you know, and given our sort of deep involvement in the C40 network, we really wanted to make sure we put a Paris compliant sustainability plan together, and that's what this was. So this ensures that Los Angeles is meeting its proportion of carbon emission reductions based on climate goals of the Paris climate agreements. So what you're seeing in this slide that's up right now is emissions by sector. Transportation is the second largest emitter here, although if you take source 2 and 3 emissions into scope 2 and 3 emissions into account, like airplanes and ocean going vessels and things like that, it quickly will hop over buildings and energy. So it's most importantly also the largest contributor to our air quality problems. So we know that it's a pressing issue and something that we need to work on. And the goals that we put out in 2019 were pretty ambitious, and we felt, you know, maybe these are doable, but we want to aim high and would rather, you know, not hit the mark, but at least set a high mark. And you can see we wanted to get to 25% of the community-wide fleet being electric in 2025, followed by 80% in 2035. These goals don't seem so crazy now, but in 2019 and late 2018, when we were coming up with them, this all seemed pretty intense. We had a 1.8% of the fleet was zero emission at that time. So excited to see what's happened in the last 4 or 5 years on this topic. And of course, we've seen through the first half of this year in California, almost 17% of total vehicle sales are electric. So it is really beginning to happen. And you know, maybe we don't hit these targets, but we feel like the trajectory is now there. So I'm not going to go through all of the goals and targets here, but you can see we've got items on buses, on the overall fleet, on you know, what we're going to do at the airport, and number of chargers installed, things of that nature, zero emission port, etc. So first, the first prong of the three-pronged approach, of course, lead by example, what we heard from San Antonio as well. For us, that is with our city fleets. It's with the public transportation that we both have direct control over and partial control over. It's with our fleets and employee chargers, any curbside or other public charging that we're able to deploy. And then one of the big tools in our toolbox here in Los Angeles is having a municipal utility, which helps on a number of fronts. It means that we can sort of control streamlining and fixing interconnection problems and things of that nature, as well as giving out rebates and incentives, which is really where I think we're putting the most effort towards getting EV chargers deployed across the city right now. Additionally, we run an EV task force here within all of our city fleets, to make sure that everyone is on the same page. It meets monthly. We've been meeting since 2016. We daylight problems amongst that group in a safe place so that we can talk about them. Oh, we're having a problem with this vendor, or like Julia's point, we've got ADA requirements we've heard about now that we didn't have before, other design issues, supply chain issues, all of the things that everyone is dealing with now. And we try to resolve these problems across our municipal agencies and not duplicate problems, which is often the case when we're working in silos. And then finally, we've of course been working on other efforts like the Climate Mayor's EV Purchasing Collaborative, which we've been very excited to work with the EC on for several years. So very quickly, just talking about our public fleets, we do have over 1,500 either battery electric or plug-in hybrid electric vehicles right now, and that is only going up, thanks in large part to our zero emission first procurement policy. So this was an update in 2019 to what we had from 2015. So in 2015, we had a 50% of all new light duty vehicles needed to be zero emission. That is now a 100% requirement, and then for sedans and light duty, and then zero emission first for anything else. This is a challenge, of course, for medium and heavy duty equipment that doesn't yet exist, but it requires that our fleet staff have to go through the exercise of always updating what's available, what can I get, what will meet my operational needs. And, you know, we're constantly piloting new equipment and new technology, and that keeps us at the forefront of knowing, all right, we like this company or we don't. We've got, you know, these needs that are met but not met, but we can use this. And just to highlight some of the pilots we've done, we have tested out various refuse collection vehicles, and they're a challenge, but they're also an area where we see a lot of opportunity because you have fixed routes, and as long as they can get the battery and the arm lift you know, needs correct, then we anticipate that those should work. We have the Western Hemisphere's first fully electric fire truck. That was a big one for us. It was a year or more delayed because of COVID, but it is in our hands right now, and we're very happy to have it and going to get it put it through its paces. Unfortunately, we have wildfires and things like that, so it will be working. We've tested out some Class 8 semis. We've tested out various flatbed and box trucks. And then we also do, I mentioned riding lawnmowers. We have plenty of smaller equipment that needs to be electrified as well, or made zero emission. We've got some hybrid street sweepers. We did have one electric Tesla Model S that we tested out for a little bit. But I have to say, we've also tested out electric scooters, electric motorcycles, and electric bicycles within some of our various fleets. And then I am excited to point to the electric F-150 that we have received that you can see there in the image. So another angle here, of course, is the zero emission public transportation. The city has its own municipal transit agency.
Looks like we lost Michael again briefly, but hopefully, oh, he's back. Perfect. Back to you, Michael. You just paused briefly. No problem.
All right. Sorry about that. Hopefully you can see the zero emission public transportation slide that's up. Not sure what you heard, but anyhow, we've got some electric buses with our Department of Transportation, and which we are fully in control of. They've committed to having a complete zero emission fleet by 2028. Which is when Los Angeles will be hosting the Olympics. And then LA Metro, which is the regional transit agency and has about somewhere between 20 out. Sorry, am I having trouble again there? All right, let's try it. We'll see if this works. So anyhow, LA Metro, lots of buses. We need to see what's working and what isn't working with them in terms of on-route charging and depot charging, things of that nature. Moving along to, oh, you know what? Is it possible for you guys to advance the slides? It's telling me I'm having a problem. Yeah, go ahead. So just pointing out to our Blue LA powered by Blink Mobility low-income EV car share program. This has been something that the city partnered with the California Air Resources Board on in 2016. We brought in an operator and have currently 40 stations deployed, 200 chargers and roughly 100 vehicles right now in the fleet. And this has been a great success. We're hitting the metrics that we want to. Somewhere between 50 and 60% of the users are coming from the disadvantaged communities where we have installed these chargers and vehicles. And we are in the process of an expansion where we're going to add another 60 stations, which will be 300 chargers and another ultimately 200 vehicles as utilization moves up. These are on the street. They present a lot of challenges, of course, in getting the infrastructure installed, but they create a very big benefit. And as I have mentioned, it's sort of a quasi public transportation in the sense that it's filling a niche in between a personal vehicle and public transit like buses and things of that nature. If we can advance to the next slide, please. So I probably should have put this one a couple before, but employee and fleet charging. We are installing a lot of this around the city. We've got several hundred public chargers at various public lots, like at our libraries and some at our parks and other public parking lots. And we're in the process, of course, of installing hundreds of fleet chargers. And I think Julia has probably experienced this, and I think most cities have. It turns out getting vehicles is relatively easy and straightforward. That process looks like it always has, but getting infrastructure installed is complicated, takes time, and doesn't always go the way that we planned. So those timelines really need to be paid attention to. Let's go ahead and advance. So again, just some curbside charging here. We do have these street light chargers deployed across the city, about 580 of them at this point, with another 150 that will be installed in this current fiscal year. These have turned out to be a wonderful benefit. They come with their own complications, as do anything that go into the right of way, but they are easily deployed. They don't require any extra permitting, and they don't require, importantly, any extra trenching at the end of the day. So they just get attached right to the street light. They tap into the power on the street light, and bada boom, bada bang, you've got a charger. We can install about 2 of them per day with one crew. So they're quite effective. One item to note that may be different from other cities: we own and maintain and control our street lights. I know in a lot of cities that's a utility owned asset, but let's go to the next slide, please. So finally, the sort of big tool in the toolbox that I mentioned, LADWP and their rebates. You can see some information here from their most recent dashboard. They have residential rebates, but the big one is their commercial level 2 charger program, which we're seeing go, fortunately, largely into multifamily dwellings, which is, I think, that area that we all know needs to be addressed and that is complicated. The rebates are around $4,000 per installed unit, and as you can see, we've jumped dramatically over the last several years from where we were to where things are now. So we've seen a market develop here where the EV charging developers essentially take the rebate, they have it consigned over to them and build at no cost to the typical apartment owner or HOA, things like that. So that's been a really effective model here locally. And let's go ahead to the next slide. So second prong here, of course, is policy development, and this is a big one. We've got building code updates that are taking on our existing, our new construction. And this is something where the city has really tried to take a leading position. And in 2019, we approved a building code that required 10% of all provided spaces in a new construction to have a charger, and an additional 20% to be EV ready, which meant having their own circuit available and conduit running to another 20% of those stalls. We are up for the triennial California Building Code update starting on January 1st of this coming year. So we will probably see this advance even more. I don't want to tip my hat because we're still in the development on that, and I don't want to get into trouble, but I think we're going to try and go a little bit higher if we can. Then enabling curbside chargers. So what I showed you before with our curbside chargers, those were all municipally owned or municipal involvement. We are in the process of creating a policy and permitting mechanism that will allow private sector entities to come in. Let's say they're building a building and they want to put chargers in front of the building, or it's a restaurant and they want to have chargers in front of their building. There will be a mechanism to do that. We don't currently have a way of doing that. Another area of policy development, of course, is a bit more in the weeds and just the usual stuff. How do you enforce these parking lot or curbside charges? Well, we needed to have an enforcement mechanism, and for us in California, that required the California Vehicle Code to speak to it first. And when that was finally adopted, we were able to put into our local Los Angeles Municipal Code an enforcement mechanism. So we can now ticket non-EVs when they're parked in those spaces. A really big one I want to highlight here, I think this is an important example of what can be done. We also now have a zero-emission commercial loading curb designation. So I think most cities have, some kind of freight or commercial loading. Looks different probably in most places. Here it's just a yellow curb, which would tell you this is for 30-minute loading. We now have the ability to designate zero emission only loading curbs. We've deployed 5 of these across the city and are hopeful that now that we have some Bright Drop and other zero emission, medium and heavy duty delivery trucks coming onto the market, we'll see these curbs be used more frequently and both be an incentive in the early days while we're not taking away other curbs, but ultimately they will be a regulatory mechanism to get companies to go to zero emission trucks. I'm going to skip these last 2, but let's move on to the next slide, please. Oh, sorry, if we can. Yeah, we're going to go to the slide that was P3. I think it's the next slide. There's the one. So the final prong here is we're always trying to work with, with the other stakeholders, because of course the city can't do everything. And that's on all fronts. We've got a zero emission bus working group. We've got a T&C electrification working group. We've got a medium and heavy duty freight working group. Let's go to the next slide. So just an example of some of the participants in these working groups. The zero emission bus working group, which has been meeting since 2017, includes, of course, the Los Angeles Department of Transportation, but then many of the other regional transit agencies that are here in LA County. And this helps us, again, similar to the internal EV task force we have, discuss ways where we might be able to share facilities or infrastructure, but also just learn from each other, share RFPs and RFQs. We don't need to reinvent the wheel once one agency has gone out and procured buses. So that's been a good example. We meet quarterly. Similar with the T&C working group and the medium and heavy duty freight working groups, you can see the types of people we're working with, but at the end of the day, it's really just making sure we're all rowing in the same direction, that we are in agreement on where we want to go, and from the city side to understand what can we do to help and move people forward, and where can we get out of the way. So I think that's it for that slide. We can maybe go to the next. Yeah, this another one to never forget about: state and federal collaboration. Sometimes it goes great. Sometimes it's complicated. I'm pretty sure that's the case for most of our cities. And these are just some of the partners who we do work with. And I think that's it for me.
Great, thank you so much, Michael, and thanks everybody and Michael for bearing with us on some of those tech challenges. But we are going to reconvene here for Q&A. So we've already had several questions come in, and encourage folks to keep submitting your questions into the Q&A box. We will get to as many of these as we can in the time that we have left. And so we will go ahead and bring Julia and Michael. I think we could probably try your camera again. I'll let you know if we have any troubles there. And so the first question that I want to ask you both is, how do you ensure that whether your internal policy or maybe it's a public facing policy, that these were a floor rather than a ceiling? Because I know gathering those internal champions is really important in the community engagement, but how do you kind of make sure that you're creating like a base starting point, but ensuring that we're continuing to move forward as quickly as we need to? And why don't we start with you, Julia?
Thanks for that question. If I'm in charge of writing policy, I'm a big fan of non-specific language. And what I mean by that is you actually need really specific language for your data and your background, but in the policy, to the extent that you're able to, if you can build in almost a safety net for things that we don't even know are coming. So new technology, innovation. I use phrases like not less than, if I have to put a number around something, so that we are not boxing ourselves in for something that may come that we never anticipated. That's not always particularly possible with policy development. But we've kind of, we work with our attorneys really well to kind of try to build in that language that allows for stuff that, again, that we didn't anticipate. So that's a quick answer to that question. There's a lot more that could go into that, but I'll let Michael respond.
Thanks. Yeah, fully agree, Julia. Give yourself space to modify or change things on the fly with your language where you're able to. One example here, I mentioned that before we had our zero emission first procurement policy for our fleets, we had a 50% requirement. So I would say that was their floor, but we did have some departments when they were purchasing vehicles who said, okay, well, we're only buying 4 this year. So, instead of buying 2 electrics, we'll just buy 4 electrics. And that gave them the opportunity to be a champion and take some credit, where they felt comfortable doing that. And also, ensured that we were hitting some of our early goals. But yes, I would agree, give yourself leeway and understand that you won't know everything that is going to change as time moves forward. You try to anticipate, but giving yourself room to come back to items in a couple of years, a couple of biennial refreshes, things of that nature.
Great, thank you both so much. And I know, having those internal and external champions during planning and deployment and implementation is incredibly important. And so I'm curious if you both could talk about either maybe a surprising champion that you had, or somebody that was particularly important, or somebody that you turned around. I think that would be a good example to share with this group as well. And Michael, why don't we start with you?
Sure, I've got 2 really good examples. So in our early electrification days in 2015, it was actually our police department that stepped up and said, we're going to buy 100 electric vehicles and we're going to install the chargers for them, which, was totally surprising for us. I'm sure I've shared this story at other times with folks, but when your police department does it, it makes it very difficult for everyone else to say no, or it won't work, or things like that. So that set a really strong signal across all of our fleets. And we have 6 fleets and 20,000 vehicles. So it was important to send a strong message like that across them. And then more recently, something I've seen within our public works division, which speaks to, more medium and heavy duty and specialty equipment. We've got a champion over there who said, hey, we're going to assess all of our operations, and we're going to talk to our superintendents and our guys who expect to have a F-250 as just their regular going around town truck. Like, hey, if you don't need this, that's not what you're going to drive, right? You can drive something smaller, and having that kind of leadership come from within the department is beyond critical, because I'm a hack here in the mayor's office. They don't care. I'm not doing what they do day in and day out. But when you have it coming from, the field teams, it really goes a long way. So we're starting to really see a culture shift here, and it takes time.
I would agree with everything you just said. Having that internal champion on any initiative is so valuable. We're lucky that we do have elected policymakers who are aligned with this agenda. But I do want to circle back on something Michael said, and that is the cars were fairly easy. And once we got over the hump of, yes, we can afford these, and yes, they're going to be, there when we need to drive around town and charged up. And the total cost of ownership is actually, going to save us money in the long run. That, again, data really important. Run those numbers, have them ready at all the presentations. Once we got over that hump, though, the charging piece was really a lot more, I'll say, challenging, because it's finding a location. It's oftentimes retrofitting an existing site. It's pulling in the power. So lots and lots of partners on that side, way more than the cars themselves. And fortunately, our building and equipment services department, who maintains our city fleet, really did get on board with it, had an open mind. We're not quite where LA is, but it's good to have those front runners out in front of us that we can call and ask questions to, so that we can, have our hands held as we're changing over.
Thank you both so much. I know that's something we share with a lot of the cities that we work with, is those internal champions and showing those examples from kind of across the country, not just in LA and San Antonio, but large and small cities. And I know, Julie, I want to turn back to you. You touched on it briefly, and we've had you speak about your really innovative public-private partnership that you've had with Blink. And so I'm hoping you could kind of talk a little bit more about that project, and maybe a little bit about the role of private companies as we get more into public charging deployment and federal funding and all of those next steps that we're seeing.
Sure thing. And thanks for the question. So just to paint the picture, a few years ago, when we really realized that, this is an initiative that we really wanted to pursue. And by the way, I'm in the Office of Sustainability, so we do a lot of policy planning, but we're certainly not in the infrastructure business. That's not our forte. Our city-owned utility at the time had made the business decision to let their first generation network of chargers kind of run their natural course, but they were going to be utilizing more incentives around charging rates versus putting in or replacing the charging infrastructure that we already had out on the streets. That is where they really wanted to incentivize electric vehicles and vehicle electrification, is through rate development. So we knew that there was a chicken and an egg situation, and that we had to have some publicly accessible charging infrastructure to get people over that range anxiety hump that we're all experiencing. And we also knew that historic funding through the Volkswagen mitigation settlement was coming into our region. And we were receiving pressure from our policymakers about how to take advantage of that one-time funding that would never be seen again. And so we put a really non-specific RFP out on the street and asked if the market really to come back with some innovative ideas around partnering with the city of San Antonio to put publicly accessible charging infrastructure. The successful respondent was Blink Charging. They have been an amazing private partner with us as we've gone through this. There's many rules and regulations on the local government side, and they're used to moving very quickly, but they have embraced this opportunity to work with us on the project. And we're doing it in a way that is cost neutral to our city. So we're offering up the real estate, so to speak. They're coming in with their charging infrastructure. They're owning, operating, and maintaining it, so that we don't have to be in the infrastructure business, so to speak. But getting to that point has required a lot of coordination with the utility. hand in glove. They've been on sites to help us pull the power, do the retrofits. And anyway, it's been a really amazing learning opportunity. And we're just, excited to have had that opportunity to work with the private sector to get this done.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. I know, Michael, you all have done a ton of that as well in LA, and it's been a really kind of key, interesting way to advance some of these strategies without having a lot of federal support. And now we're still needing that, along with all of this new exciting money that will be coming down. And so for our last question here, I know that this will be part of our playbook and something that is talked about a lot throughout city government, but curious from you both, what strategies have been most successful for engaging and getting input from the public around charging infrastructure? And Michael, why don't you start with that one?
Sure. I'm going to use our Blue LA program as an example, another Blink one currently, but this program for us has required doing a lot of outreach, and I'd say a year of outreach before we go ahead or more before we go ahead and actually deploy or install anything. And what was important, or what we found to be important, was that you were working with local partners. So we had our original operator before Blink, and they knew, well, we don't know the people on the ground in these neighborhoods that we're working. So let's find some of the CBOs who really know the community, who work in the community. Let's get all on the same page about what we're trying to do, why we're trying to do it, and then have them go out and really get that input and feedback from the community, from people they knew. So you had a trusted ambassador going out, and we continue to work with those local on the ground CBOs, because they're the ones who are going to say, hey, how's this going? What problems are you running into, and all of that, and ensure that the service that's being delivered, one, is one that is actually needed and one that people want. And two, it's not sort of the government just coming in and saying, hey, here's a thing you need, we're putting it here. So for us, it's really been about understanding it's going to take time and working with the local stakeholders.
Yep, I would totally echo that. I love that sort of these best practices are repeated, no matter what city you happen to be from. My slide was kind of frozen on my community engagement piece, but I wanted to call out that in addition to our EVSA kind of informational campaign, I'll call it, we are also doing a broader climate engagement effort, very robust. And we are contracting with community-based organizations to help them engage their constituencies around these topics and bring back the priorities that those communities need and want. And not surprisingly, probably, impact on public health, air quality, those have been repeated themes throughout all of our climate initiatives. And specifically, we have a solution for that if we are promoting vehicle electrification. So yeah, it's kind of a 1-2 punch. This is a two-way listening dialogue. We never presume to know what the community needs until they tell us. But resoundingly, people are embracing this technology and really excited that there's going to be a cleaner way to travel around. It's here again, like I said earlier. So ongoing. Very important.
Well, thank you so much to Michael and Julia, and thank you to all of us for joining today. We are always so inspired by our city partners and the work that you all are doing out there, and really kind of creating this electric future and accelerating it. And so thank you just again for all of your hard work and partnership. And we're excited to host the next installment of our Charging Forward webinar series on October 20th at 2 o'clock Eastern. And next month, we will be joined by representatives from Audi, GM, and the East Bay Community Energy, who will discuss complementary policy. And so you can register for this webinar on our website or by scanning the QR code that will show up on the screen after we are done today. And finally, thank you all so much and have a great day.